Hi everyone, dear participants. Let's please wait 5 more minutes for others to join, and then we will start our lecture for today. Thank you. Dear participants, I believe we can start. I'm very much delighted to welcome you to the CAREC Women Empowerment and Opportunity platform. And today our guest speaker series titled Rest as Resistance, Care and Wellbeing of Feminist Human Rights Defenders. The topic is very much interesting, and we are planning to have the conversation and explore how the power of rest, care, and collective well-being and healing as feminist strategies is important to sustain activism and resilience. But before we start our session today, I have few quick housekeeping notes, let's say. So please keep your microphone muted during the session unless you are speaking or invited to contribute. This is important to minimize background noise and ensure a smooth experience for everyone. And of course, you are welcome to share reflection or questions in the Zoom chat box throughout the event. And there will be a floor for the Q&A session at the end of the event. Now, before we start our conversation around this interesting topic, I would love to ask all of you to take a quick group photo so we can capture this moment together. And now, if you're comfortable, please, can you turn your camera on just for a minute so we can take the photo? Charles, please, can you help us to take a photo?
Sure. Yes. Kindly open your cameras, please.
Please, everyone, dear participants.
Okay. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Another 1. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I'm pleased to introduce our guest organization for today and our speakers. So our featured guest organization for today is Baithak, Challenging Taboos. It's a woman-led grassroots initiative from Pakistan that has impacted over 500,000 women and girls by breaking stigmas, fostering community power, and advocating for gender justice, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and climate equity. Under its bold and intersectional leadership, Baithak has championed initiatives such as Arrest as Resistance, the Masculinity Manifesto, and the Behinchara Network for Feminist Leaders. More information about their work will be introduced later by the speakers themselves. So let me introduce our speakers for today. We have Aisha Amin, founder and CEO of Baithak organization. Aisha is a feminist activist and gender expert recognized for her pioneering work across South Asia. She has been honored with multiple awards, including the CAREC Gender Climate Award last year and the Gender Just Climate Solution Award at COP28. We have the next speaker, Sheila Nihat Shahid, advisor of the organization Baithak. Sheila is a feminist researcher and award-winning reproductive justice advocate, known for her work on their rights and decolonial approaches to care. She is currently a graduate scholar at the Vitvaz Laurent University in Hungary. And we have the next speaker, Sarah Nisar, learning and development consultant of Baithak. Sarah is a leadership and gender equality specialist with experience driving impact across South and Southeast Asia. She has worked a lot with organizations like YEDU and Acumen Academy and focused on empowering grassroots movements for entrepreneurship, feminist learning, and systematic change. We start our conversation today with Sheila. Sheila, please, the floor is yours. Feel free to lead this discussion.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gulshat, for such a lovely introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be hosting this session on rest as resistance and collaborating with CAREC. So a little bit more about Baithak, the organization that me, Aisha, and Sarah are a part of. Baithak is a grassroots, feminist, women-led, youth-led organization through which we are primarily working on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And also we're working on feminist approaches of leadership and also of community building. And in this session, we will be sharing more about our work on well-being and care, and also findings from the research that field research that we have done on the topic of well-being and care. I would just ask my teammate if we can. Thank you so much. Also have the presentation, so I'll just quickly share the objectives for the session as well. So what we're aiming to achieve from this webinar and the time that we have with you is to reimagine care and well-being, to explore the feminist perspective of well-being and care that is rooted in global South narratives. Um, and then we'll also look forward to sharing tools, that what are some practical tools through which the participants here, can also integrate well-being into our daily lives, and also how we do work, like how can well-being become a part of how the work is done in the global South. Then identifying strategies. In this, we will identify both individual and collective strategies on how can we sustain ourselves during crisis situations or emergency settings, and how can care and well-being be a priority for the human rights defenders as well. And then reflecting on personal experiences. The aim of this session is to create a space, a safe space for feminist human rights defenders, grassroots activists, people from different civil society organizations who are working in climate emergencies, to reflect on their own experiences for care and well-being. So this is like the main objective that we're aiming to achieve from this webinar. So to open this conversation and this space with all of you, I invite you to answer this simple question that what color describes your energy today? So I would invite you to take a moment to reflect on what energy or emotion or thoughts you're bringing into the space today, and what color would you choose to describe it. And once you have your color, you can drop it in the chat so we can have a idea of what kind of energy this space holds for us. And we can also have the moment to just share something with each other and say hi, say our hellos. So what color would you choose to describe your energy? So Afia says red, and that too in caps, it's red. Light pink, Ifra, light pink, Abida, red, Gulshad is pink. I saw Gulshad, you're also in pink. Light yellow. I love the precision. The orangey red. I'm loving the descriptions. Then Masuma has pink. There's another color in the middle that I believe is in a different language. So I would love if someone can translate that in English for me. Sonia, orange. Rukaya, red, red, light pink, pink, bright yellow. Super excited to see the team doing similar work. We're also very excited to have you, Berira. Mint green, blue. And we also have more colors in the middle. Mustard. Okay. I'm loving these responses, and I also really like how people have shared like descriptions, like bright yellow, light pink, bright red, orangey red. And I think with just looking at all of these colors, my own color that I'm bringing into the space today is also yellow, because yellow is, for me, it's a color of joy. It is a color of hope. And how Barira said that it is exciting to be in a space where you see people doing similar work. It just gives me a lot of hope, and to be in a space where we can hold these conversations and meet people who are on the same page with us, it is just a reminder, of that hope is there in the civil society space. And Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this little check-in activity and setting the tone of the discussion. And I'm really, really excited to interact with all of you in this session and to hear inputs from your end as well. Okay, so since the topic for today is about rest as resistance, and we'll be talking a lot about well-being and care, and also we'll be sharing our own experiences and research findings. So it is important that while we speak about care and well-being, we also prioritize our well-being and how we engage in this space. So the objective, the vision is that we all engage mindfully today and also prioritize our own well-being in this digital space. The topics that we will discuss in this session can be heavy or triggering, or some topics may bring up strong emotions or personal experiences for some people. So that's why here are some quick reminders of how can we interact with this space and how can we also just prioritize our own well-being. So so we have like the main tips for how can we engage mindfully. The first one is, of course, having your video on is your own choice, and it is your personal choice with what you feel comfortable with. We would love to see you and engage with you, but if any moment you feel like you need your own space, you can just turn off your video and engage and still engage with us through the chat box, or if you want to share something. And then on the below that is the chat option, which we already did in the check-in, that if there is something that you want to say, but maybe you don't want to unmute yourself, you can always just write it in the chat. We will be very mindful and we'll be very present to see and get the responses from all of the places. The other reminder is to stay hydrated. Even in digital spaces, we're here for an hour. Keep a water bottle with you or something, or a drink of your own choice. Like I have my coffee, something that energizes you, something that you would like to just sip on while you take a break or just step back from the session. The other reminder is to just take a break from the session overall. You can either turn off your video and still be here, but if you feel like it's getting too heavy, it is your own personal choice if you want to engage or not, and you can take a break from the session as well. And these two figures that are having a conversation on top is a reminder that here, when we talk about well-being, we're also talking about collective well-being in this space. So so I invite you all to be curious, to be respectful, to be mindful of each other's presence in the digital space as well. And if there's something that you want to share and you believe that would be helpful for other people as well, because we're all doing similar work, feel free to drop it in the chat box. And also we're going to be mindful, of the space that we give to each other, and how we respond to each other's like how we respond to anything that the other person shares, with respect and with curiosity. And with these strategies, these are just some reminders of how you can interact. With this, if you also have some personal grounding activities that help you feel safe, we also invite you to practice them within this digital space that we have together with you. And yes, there is this 5-finger breathing activity. It is like a brain break activity. It really helps me with digital spaces. There's like a hand on the screen, and you trace it while you breathe in and you breathe out. So I'm gonna drop the photo of this in the chat box. So at any moment, if you want to take a break and if you want to do a breathing exercise, you can adopt this tool and you can use this tool. It's really helpful, really works for me, and I really hope that it works for you as well. And with this, I'm gonna pass the floor to Aisha Amin to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sila, and hello, everyone. It's lovely to connect with all of you. uh, I think Sila has covered a lot of ground on the work we do. Um, what I'd be doing is I'll be setting some context in terms of the work, like why we work on well-being and care of feminist activists, a study that we conducted, how it's connected with the broader feminist movement, what's happening in the world, why are we now very urgently demanding that well-being and care be integrated into feminist movements, and why we are mobilizing resources for it. But before that, uh, I want you, all of those who are activists or advocates in this space, in this meeting, or anyone who maybe even volunteers, right? Can you remember of moments where you have had like a lot of energy? As an activist, we have these moments where we feel that we will change this world. We there's a rush of energy. This energy can come from anywhere. This can come from hope. This can come from anger. This can come from excitement. And in that moment, we feel that, we're going to dismantle all the systems. And over time, the energy goes down over the days. The hope changes, like hope transforms into hopelessness. And we feel very disappointed. So this drop in energy in activism is because the systems that we're fighting against are so oppressive and exploitative, that they demand our burnout. They benefit from our burnout, from our exhaustion. So, and there have been multiple moments in my journey where I've felt, sudden spike in the energy and then sudden drop in the energy because of the exhaustion. But this one very particular moment where we felt it as a team was in 2022. So in 2022, just to give you the context, Pakistan was hit by one of the worst climate crises in that we have seen in country's history. It was mass flooding, which affected over 33 million people. Pakistan is a very climate crisis vulnerable country. In fact, like one of the most climate vulnerable country. We're always like ranked somewhere higher in the climate index vulnerability. But in 2022, what we saw was unprecedented. It was mass flooding that displaced a lot of people. And a lot of the communities that we have been working with, because we work with grassroots rural communities that are underserved, were amongst the worst affected because these were the communities that were displaced. So we started receiving a lot of messages, a lot of calls for support from our communities. And since we heavily work with young girls and women, we were getting requests for support around gender based violence, around menstrual kits. This is what brought us in a very active role in climate advocacy, climate and gender advocacy. So we spent around 6 months on ground working with the communities that were affected by floods. And what we saw was a complete disregard for gender specific needs of young girls and women. There were no wash facilities for women, their privacy was compromised. Women had lost access to menstrual kits, menstrual products. There was also an increased rate of gender based violence and sexual exploitation that was happening in the formal and informal flood settlements. And we found ourselves doing the work that we were not prepared for because it was a crisis situation. And because there were no systems and there were no institutions that were in place to help us in helping the survivors of gender-based violence or sexual exploitation in flood camps, or helping other young girls and women navigate their gender-specific needs during floods and displacement. We felt very hopeless. And this took an emotional toll on us, because we were also, while we were supporting a lot of survivors of sexual exploitation, we felt that there was complete absence of reporting mechanisms, for example, for gender-based violence, or for any mental health support for gender-based violence survivors. We also felt that we didn't have tools or resources to support our mental health and well-being as a team. All of this took an emotional toll on us, and with an increasing frequency of climate crisis in Pakistan, we found ourselves working with communities that were affected, that were navigating loss, trauma, displacement, uh, which also re-traumatized a lot of our own personal experiences. And when we started talking to other feminist activists who were involved in the climate crisis response, we found out that this was a shared gap and a shared need, that there were no resources or funding or tools or spaces to support well-being and care of those who were providing care during those crises. So we, in order to understand what were the needs around mental health and well-being, what were the feminist activists doing, how were different crises unfolding, what were the support mechanisms available, or what they needed, we conducted an extensive study in last year. So the initial groundwork for this study was done during the floods in the 6 months when we were on ground, when we were talking to activists. We conducted a lot of consultations where this shared need emerged. So in 2023, this not in 2023, like in last year, we conducted an extensive study in so the study involved an in-person extensive study in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is the northern part of Pakistan, and Sindh, southern Pakistan, and then some virtual key informant interviews in Balochistan and in Punjab, which are other two provinces. So this was an extensive study that we conducted with frontline workers, with feminist activists who were addressing the needs of young girls and women in some sort of crisis setting, mostly climate crisis. I would like to share some findings briefly from this study because this has really shaped our work on well-being and care. So some of the findings that we that emerged from this study, one one thing that a lot of activists told us. So whenever we asked us about their care and well-being, their immediate response was about the work, about the care of their communities. The idea that they also have to take care of themselves was very strange to them, and this is something that especially when it comes to women in especially South Asia or in some of the other countries, self-care or care for women is considered as an act of as as a greedy act, because women are always seen in the gendered role of taking care of others. And when you're an activist and a woman, then there is the increased guilt of thinking of yourselves. So the idea was very alien to them. And so it took us a lot of time of relationship building, of trust building, to actually sit with them and to understand what their emotional needs were, what were their care needs. They shared that in terms of crisis, in the face of crisis, especially when they're responding to a crisis, they see increased rates of sexual harassment and exploitation, which I also mentioned earlier. But they shared that they also face a lot of sexual exploitation and harassment during crisis. And the affectees of those crises also experience exploitation and sexual harassment, and which re-triggers a lot of their trauma, because a lot of these activists are also were also displaced by the flood, so they were affectees and also at the same time involved in the response. So this took a lot of this took toll on their emotional and mental well-being. They also shared that they constantly navigate institutions that are misogynistic, that are patriarchal, that are extractive, and they face a lot of challenges in navigating those systems in their everyday activism, but also during the crisis. Um, what we heard very frequently, what also was also the taboo around mental health. Mental health is anyways a taboo topic, and when it comes to crisis, there is an inherent guilt that activists care for taking care of themselves, that we share. This is something that we heard from multiple activists. So, for example, an activist from Peshawar shared, how do you, this is a quote from one of the focus group discussions. So she shared, how do you take a break when people rely on you? When women call you at midnight because they are in danger, how do you say, sorry, I need rest? So again, in time of crisis, it is really a huge challenge for activists to prioritize their health. Digital harassment and surveillance is something that we also have been hearing repeatedly, especially in times where we rely so much on digital spaces. This is also something, as a team at Baithak, we experience a lot of harassment and a lot of like a lot of hate speech for the work we do, because we work on reproductive health, something that is not prioritized in traditional settings. So we get a lot of hate speech in digital spaces as well, something that other activists also shared. There was also layered nature of trauma that we observed, especially in areas that had climate crisis with some other form of crisis going on, especially in northern Pakistan, that had seen a lot of security concerns. So a lot of activists shared how displacement during floods re-triggered their trauma of displacement when they were very young, and they were displaced because of security risk. So, and again, as activists, when we don't get access to support and care, we bring a lot of unhealed trauma in our activism as well, which is re-triggered constantly when we work with survivors of different kinds of crisis. So there was a lot of unhealed trauma from previous crises as well. These were some findings from the study that we cared. I would now just like to draw a picture of why are we talking so much about care and well-being of feminist movements, especially like why now? What is the urgent need? So, a lot of you who are working, who are feminist activists or are working, in these spaces, would have seen that feminist activists or, uh, activists from from across the globe, we see them at the front line of climate crisis, from of of displacement, censorship, shrinking civic space. So we are fighting multiple crises at one time. There's a lot of crackdown on feminist activism. We have seen the cut down on development aid for gender work. So there are multiple crises that feminist activists are fighting with shrinking civic spaces and shrinking funding and resources. So the world right now, the world has always been like this, but we see that the world is becoming more capitalistic, the world is becoming more colonial, the world is becoming more patriarchal, the world is becoming more anti-feminist, anti-queer, and so the world is demanding our exhaustion, because that's how social inequities prevail. So these are multiple systems that we're fighting against, and all of us are built to oppress the voices of activists, especially feminist activists. And when we talk about care and well-being, it means that we are talking about sustaining our movement. Something that I talked about earlier was, how our energy goes down over the period if we don't have care and well-being and solidarity, and if we don't have tools for integrating well-being into our movements. So we see care and well-being as a political act of resistance. So it's a refusal by us to give it to the oppressive systems. So the systems demand our exhaustion, but we as a collective choose to pause, care, resist in order to sustain our movements. And collective care. And when we talk about care, we don't only talk about self care, which is also important, but we talk about collective care and healing, because it is important to build resilient, inclusive, and trauma informed movements. It also involves the security in digital spaces, at an emotional level, and at a physical level as well. So while we're doing this, what we're doing is that we're demanding funding for care and well-being. Traditional donors do not um, provide funding or resources to feminist movements for care and well-being, but in our work we are not only highlighting the gap, but we're also advocating with the funders to provide to prioritize funding for well-being and care of feminist activists, so that we can sustain ourselves, our activism, and sustain the movement against the oppressive, unjust systems. On this note, I will pause and pass it to my team member Silla, because now we also wanted to share some strategies with you people that you can practice for well-being and care, and we'd also love to hear other practices that maybe you have, some tools that you have that you can share with us. So back to you, Silla.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing about the work in so much detail. So now we're going to move to talking about the strategies for care and well-being. And like Aisha said, that the concept of individual and collective well-being go hand in hand. Self-love and self-care is a very important concept, and it is essential that it is combined with, it exists with the idea of collective well-being. And when there is individual and collective well-being, the idea of joy is also very important, that has to exist in these spaces. And that is how we'll discuss care and well-being from a feminist perspective. It's individual, it's collective, and it's joyful. And what is important is that we, as activists, as feminist activists, or as um, as community developers, we redefine what well-being means. That instead of the idea of well-being as being something that isolates us or pushes us into solitude, how does it become something that brings us together? How does the idea of well-being become something that makes us feel seen, makes us feel heard, and makes us build a community, a community of our own, a social support net of our own. And for this, uh, so these are some questions that I'll be answering for the everyday practices of care and well-being. That how, as activists, we can pause and care for ourselves even in high pressure environments. Like Aisha mentioned, that the work becomes really heavy at times, that you have to manage the lived experiences, and at the same time you have to do your advocacy alongside that, and it can become really heavy. And in that, you do need to just pause and reconnect with yourself. So how can you do that in a high pressure environment? What are some can we just go back for 1 second? The and with that, like some strategies that you can use on your day to day, some grounding techniques and joy rituals. And with that, how can everyone, how can you build collective care into our organizational culture? These are some questions that we'll be answering. Now we can go to the next slide. So the pointers on this slide are adopted by the CoFem Feminist Joy Toolkit. CoFem is an organization. It's the Coalition of Feminists for Social Change that works on political advocacy. So we have adopted these pointers from their Feminist Joy Toolkit. I will also share the link for the toolkit in the chat if someone wants to take a more detailed look at it. And we have adapted these pointers into what we practice at Baithak. So I will also be sharing some examples of how, as Baithak, we adopt these strategies into our day-to-day work. And if you do something similar in your organizations, we would love to know. So you can always, share with us in the comments, so we can also have this exchange of, how we incorporate joy, well-being and care into our works. So the first strategy, like how we started that, just take a moment to breathe. Sometimes you really underestimate how just taking a pause, how important that can be. And there are like in the feminist activist space, like how Aisha said that the system demands our exhaustion, that the demands for change, they're urgent and then they're tiring and they're rigorous. So in all of this, just to take a moment for mindful breathing can become a really important act to just be present and to be connected with yourself. And mindful breathing is more than just inhaling and exhaling. It is to deliberately connect with yourself and to ground yourself, to just recenter yourself in the moment. And there are a lot of different strategies. And in the toolkit, it mentions how can you practice these different strategies for breathing. There's box breathing, belly breathing, nostril breathing. This is something that I usually practice a lot. There's the 5 4 3 2 1 method. I will not go in a lot of details of each method. I'll just share the toolkit because different methods work for different people. So you can see what methods are there and see what works for you and how can you add it to your day-to-day life. The second one is practicing feminist affirmations. This is like a reimagined version of journaling, because when we look into affirmations, it's also important of what we're telling ourselves. You know, how are we through our affirmations questioning the system, challenging the system, and also define the politics of rest. That it just using affirmations but rooted in feminist values. It's a very simple yet powerful tool that can be used on in your day-to-day work individually and also with your team. Here are some examples that sisterhood empowers me. I stand against injustice. My emotions are valid. I deserve rest. Because like how Aisha was saying, that we exist in a world where the work demands like a lot of our time and energy, and it's extractive. So in that, even when we take rest or even when we just take a pause, it comes with a lot of guilt that that there's so much going on, and you know, like how can I take this time for myself? And especially in the cultures in the global South cultures, specifically in the South Asian culture, for women or for feminists to take rest, it is an alienated concept. um, so just to use such affirmations on our daily basis, it's our way to also redefine how organizational structures, how organizational work cultures can look like. And it's a very fun exercise to do with your team, you know, in the team meetings or morning check-ins or just like during the evening time. This is something that we also practice at Baithak a lot, and it's a way of just also celebrating each other, uplifting each other. Then networking and peer support, cultivating connections with the feminist community, from collaborating on projects to celebrating achievements. This part is really, really important. The With the question we had in the last slide, that you know, how can you um, pause and care for yourself in high pressure environments? That is where the network and peer support really comes in, because we have been in spaces, in advocacy spaces, where the sense of community and just connecting with other feminist activists has saved us. And that is why it's important that when we do work in these spaces, we build, we also aim to build like a bigger community, you know, also within the civil society. How can we foster collaborations? How can we work together? How can we rely on each other? That is really, really important. With that, collective celebrations can easily be integrated into the everyday, your day-to-day work. That moments of celebrations with your team, and also with the wider feminist community. That if there are other organizations, you know, that achieve something, because at the end we all are fighting the same systems. We all are fighting the same systems of oppression. So when we see our fellow activists or feminists achieving something, it's also important that we also celebrate them and we join them in their celebrations. And then in everyday, to practice joy, because joy is it is not a luxury, but joy is a revolutionary act. And to incorporate the concept of joy in your day to day is also a way of resisting the system that is like that demands our exhaustion, that we will choose to not be disconnected, we will choose not to be exhausted, but we will choose to practice joy in our day to day. With this, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you so much. Okay, and with this, I will pass the floor to our team member, Sarah. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sila. Hi, everyone. We've just been talking a lot about the work that Baithak's been doing, and Sila also shared with us the everyday strategies that we can implement for our own care, for care of our team members as well. And just being feminists and activists in this space, how can we ensure that we're looking after ourselves even as we're doing this work? But I think another thing that is very, very important, connected to what Aisha shared earlier, that we're part of systems that thrive on extractive behaviors, on making sure that under the guise of productivity, we kind of let go of taking care of ourselves. It thrives on us not feeling our 100%. It is also very, very important to take into account collective care and well-being. So how can we work together as a community, as a group, to make sure that we're looking out for each other? And this is not a new concept, because if we know in the global south, especially, care has never had an individual focus. It has always been something that has been woven into the fabric of our communities. The work that we always do, the movements that we are a part of, that are that the generations before us, our mothers, grandmothers, the movements that they were a part of, they've been built on a foundation that care and any kind of systemic change happens in a collective and never in isolation. So we're living in a time now where isolation is being fed to us, or like it's being talked about as something where individuality is being talked about as something that is the way to go. But that is a concept that we really have to reject. We have to talk about collective care, because with this, we will then bring forth an existing practice of recognizing care as a culture as opposed to just a commodity. So ensuring that we're taking some time to pause, whether it's breaks, whether it's daily moments of collective pause, collective breathing, it's actually revolutionary. It is often cited as, okay, maybe we're procrastinating or maybe we're being lazy, but it actually rejects the extractive pace of systems that we're working to change. And I'm also going to share some other practices on how can we make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as a whole, as a collective, as a community. So while we take care of each other, we also make sure that we are connected to the larger system, because only then we can begin to understand how to bring about a change that feels more lasting as well. If we can move to the next slide. So some of the strategies that we can look to implement, whether in our organizations, whether in smaller groups, even in the families that we're part of, anywhere which way that we're doing this work, whether for ourselves or for others, there are different ways that we can think about how to make sure that we're all in it together as opposed to just focusing on one individual. So starting with care as a counterculture, when we look at a capitalist system or we look at extractive systems and practices, we need to make sure that we counter it with practices that enable us to pause. So one of the things that organizations do, including Baithak, is to make sure that there are collective pauses twice a year, which kind of goes against the capitalist system of productivity, where taking a break is seen as something that is not okay. So we want to challenge that capitalist demand by making sure that we're taking a collective pause where we enable ourselves, our bodies, to rest and restore ourselves before coming back to the work that we're doing. Connected to that is also the work-life balance. So we usually talk a lot about how there needs to be a work-life balance. And it is seen as something separate. So we're still doing the work, but then we talk about how can we make sure that we do additional activities to kind of have that life balance, so to speak. But I think it is important to recognize that there is no such thing as work life. Your life includes your work. So we have to move towards creating culture where care isn't separate from the activism. So it is not about, okay, on this day, I'm going to do my activism work and then I'm going to have separate days or separate time for care. But how can we make sure that within our activism, we're embedding care practices into it as well? So taking some of the strategies that Silla also shared, making sure that as we're doing this work, we're also taking care of ourselves. Connected to this are the peer support systems. So understanding that this work cannot be done alone. It is too big of a task. It is too huge of a challenge to be able to tackle it alone. So knowing that the people that we are working with, how can we have regular check-ins with them? So not just talking about the work tasks, so not just checking in with each other about the work that we're doing or a to-do list that we need to complete, but also our emotional and spiritual well-being. So understanding how can we make sure that we're checking in on where we're at as well, how we're feeling, things that are happening in our lives outside of work. So having a buddy that you can check in with regularly, or having team members that with whom you can share more than just the work tasks. And through that, acknowledging that our struggles are interconnected. So every time when we talk about relationships, we talk about relational work, that is where healing happens. So we cannot heal in isolation. If you only look at what is it that we can do as individuals to make sure that we heal and we take a rest, usually it doesn't really lead us to anywhere, because we need to be part of relationships. We need to be part of sharing our struggles with each other to be able to understand that all the challenges that we're facing is something that kind of brings us together, and making sure that we learn from each other and we support each other in the healing as well. If you're part of any organizations, some of the organizational shifts that you can think about are how to slow down intentionally. So, for example, one of the things that Baithak also does is to make sure that, there is intentionality in how it comes together. So one of the ways that can happen is that aligning our pace with natural cycles. We often feel that if we look at a month, there are days when we feel that we have a lot of energy, and maybe that can be a time to do like high action, or like kind of make sure that anything that requires more energy can be scheduled for that time. And any time that we feel that we're not as active and that we don't have a lot of energy, rather than being very hard on ourselves and pushing ourselves to do the work and to still kind of show up at our 100%, maybe acknowledging that this can be a period for reflection as well. I also know it might not be possible 100% of the time, like all the time. It may be difficult, especially during moments of crisis, or when there is a lot of work to be done, or communities that we're supporting as well. But just acknowledging and building in a practice of not being hard on ourselves if we are not able to give our 100%, and making sure that anytime we have a chance, we are kind of creating a combination of having slower periods and also energetic periods when our cycles and the time allows for it. And with that, also having transparent conversations with her team, with her groups about capacity. So normalizing saying that I need support, or that we need to slow down, because oftentimes we don't understand or recognize that different people are at different points in their lives, or at with the work that we're doing. So seeing that how can we create a culture, like an organizational culture, of talking about what we need and talking about how we can work together as a collective to make sure that we're taking into account each other's care and well-being as well. And with that, also being part of community care networks. So making sure that we have systems for reciprocal support that can strengthen community bonds. So for example, if we are able to provide support with regards to technical skills or childcare, making sure that we have that system in place where we tell each other that we can show up for each other beyond a certain kind of work as well. And with that, also having regular gatherings that focus on restoration, and also understanding that if we are able to heal ourselves, if we are able to fill our own cup, only then we will be able to do the same for others as well. So this is something that we often disregard when we are doing this work, especially as women. We're so focused on protecting, taking care of, and healing others that we often overlook our own care. So, if that is something that we focus on for each other as well, where we are by default focused on others, but if we take out a moment to check in with ourselves and each other, that are we taking care of ourselves? And if we do that in a collective, that is what would strengthen the movement as well, because this is kind of unlearning a lot of the behaviors that we've been taught that as women, our sole responsibility is only to be caregivers for others. So if we kind of hold this responsibility for each other, where we check in with each other and talk about how we're taking care of ourselves, we will automatically move towards a system that kind of rejects the extractive practices that thrive on us not being at our 100%. With this, I'm also going to open the floor for questions. So, any questions that you have, anything that you want to share about strategies that you implement in your own practice, in your own organizations, we would love to hear from you. We would love to, like anything that you're curious about to know more about Baithak's work, you can unmute yourself and share your questions, or you can type them in chat and we will answer them as they come up.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you to our wonderful speakers from Baithak, challenging Taboo for such, I would say, honest and powerful insight from the work you are doing. And I believe most of you agree that today's session reminded us that rest and care, it's not just it's not signs of weakness, but it's actually vital tools to support and sustain the work that you are all doing in the regions and for the protecting our well-being. And it's very inspiring for me personally that the important work that you did, especially in the 2022, is all being led by you, by young women who are very thoughtful, brave, and visionary leaders. And you are doing this very much impact and meaningful change, not only in your communities, but beyond. So we are very proud to have you today and to have this conversation about your experience, reflection, and actions. So thank you very much for being part of the CAREC WEOP platform. And please, dear participants, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands or post them directly in the chat box, and I will read from there. Because I do have some questions I would like to ask myself. So please, anyone, before we... Okay, so I don't see anyone raising their hands or sending the question. So let me start with my question. So as an organization, you've reached over than 500,000 women and girls, right? It's mentioned. So from your experience, how does this investing in well-being and rights impact or translate into the long-term economic empowerment for women? Since, like, you know, the CAREC, the work that we are doing, it's around this like economic context. So, but I would like to hear like this connection, if that's possible. Thank you.
Sila and Zara? Okay, I can go ahead. Thank you so much, Gulshat, for sharing this question. um, I think it is an interesting question that you have asked. Like something that we were talking about, that there's a lot of burnout and there's a lot of exhaustion, in when you are an activist. And what usually happens is, so again, even for activists who are working for economic empowerment, right? Um, a lot of times the work uh, does not sustain because of this exhaustion. A lot of activists are also doing unpaid or underpaid work because of the burnout, because of the exhaustion. We do put a lot of time in strategizing but we do not put enough time into well-being and care, and what really happens is that the movements fall off. The activism, it dies down over the time. And what the well-being and care, even if it's, let's say, even if it's a movement for economic empowerment of women, what well-being and care does is it sustains the movement. I do also want to mention, because you've specially talked about the economic aspect of young girls and women, there's a lot of unpaid work that women are doing, have been doing for years. For example, the reproductive care work that women do that is not paid. And so even the capitalistic economies are functioning on unpaid care work of women and of activists. So when we talk about the economic aspect, it's also important to talk about how we can integrate, like how we can also talk about the unpaid labor, that on which the economic or the capitalistic structures are resting. Yeah,
Okay.
Sarah and
Thank you very much, Aisha. I saw that Rakia, right, was raising the hand. And Bernard, you are the next. Rakia, would you like to ask the question? Please go ahead. Okay, maybe Bernard, please. Go ahead, Bernard.
Greetings to everybody. I'm so happy to hear our sisters, activist feminists from Baithak organization. Thank you for sharing your experience, and you today is really one how the additional champions in my list. I'm so happy that the women in your community had your leadership to tackle these after flood emergencies and challenges. As I have understand your organization's role, and also, and this is really appreciated much, especially paying attention to this care, and the unpaid contribution of women, and this labor, which is really not valued. So I'm happy that you are on this conversation. But my question is about, I have two questions. First, I'm from Kyrgyzstan. I'm a gender mainstream specialist in UNDP. And also, I'm active, how say, CAREC gender platform webinars, which is really helpful, especially from this regional lens. So my question is, what is the extent of mutual support and solidarity among organizations, women-led organizations, movements, feminist groups in your context, whether it is reached? If yes, so then how it was possible? Because we understand that women and women organizations, they are not homogeneous, that they have each, even though we are for the women's rights, but still the missions can have, I don't know, sometimes maybe kind of not contradictions, but still clashes. I'm telling from my experience that it's really challenging thing in our work. This is the first question. And the second, as I see that, how to say, the great, our hope to our youth and young generation, is there any perspectives in your, I don't know, like strategies? How are you going, or is anything is done towards kind of handing over, of all these roles? because I'm from my age, yeah, I can say, yeah, maybe how to say, like humbly, that yeah, when it's low energy, when it's not like losing commitment, however, it's like losing sometimes hope, yeah. When you think like, oh, it's again not working, these kind of things. So whether you have this young, like energized with the same mind, yeah, with the same agenda, your processors, yeah, who will continue and proceed. So that will be very helpful to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. I can start. I can answer, like, share my reflections to both your questions, and then Aisha and Sila can add. So, to your first question, I believe no movement is without challenges. I don't think there is or can be categorized an ideal situation or like an ideal level where we can talk about everyone working together with each other. And I think movements in Pakistan also are very cyclic in nature when it comes to that. So there have been times when movements and groups have worked really well together, but then there have been times when there have been challenges as well. And it's a range of challenges, right? So one of the challenge that I remember our movements faced was also a generational understanding. So the gap between, let's say, the older feminists versus the younger feminists, and understanding like the perspectives that each have, because the lived realities of each of those groups was very different. So I think there have been those moments when we have maybe not agreed with each other, or maybe it has been hard to kind of understand each other's perspectives. But I think there comes a time, like through a lot of conversation, and I feel like this is where collective care is very important, because this is where we kind of identify that we need to talk it out, we need to share what the challenges are, and we need to use these spaces, use these Baithaks as an example, to kind of understand what the real purpose is that we're fighting for. So knowing that, okay, this is something that each of us are feeling, and we all bring different unique perspectives and our own lived realities into something. And sometimes we do deviate away from the collective purpose that we have, but having these conversations is always very important. So I don't see in Pakistan, at least what I think, that there has been like a permanent achievement of, okay, we've reached this space where we all work with each other and there are no disagreements. I feel it ebbs and flows. There are times when we all come together and work really well together, but then there are times when there are fractions and divisions as well, because of everyone's different experiences and perspectives. In those moments, healing really helps. In those moments, collective care really helps. So that is one thing that we try to focus on always, to make sure that when there are these differences, how can we use conversation, community, and collective care as a way to kind of bridge those gaps. To your other question, in terms of what gives us hope, again, I feel like this is also something that cannot happen in isolation, because I feel like each of us have our moments of feeling like the work is very overwhelming, of feeling like we're constantly pushing against the tide, that we're doing the work and nothing seems to be changing. It is also such a systemic challenge, right? It's not something that we can solve overnight. So I feel like there are moments of feeling that we have been doing so much, and we've been doing so much for years, but the shifts feel very slow. And I think in that, again, community really helps, because when there are days when I feel really low, for example, having a conversation with someone who's not feeling that way, or who is able to kind of help me see hope in all the work that we have done and all the positives that we have achieved, that really helps. So in this as well, like, kind of building each other up, knowing that if a person is feeling low one day, or if, like, there comes a moment of like feeling a lot of hopelessness, connecting to others who maybe still have perspectives or still have ways to kind of identify hope, that helps. Because hearing from others, both from older and younger feminists, I would say, and generations, because oftentimes I've learned lessons from women in my family from previous generations, of how they found ways to kind of go on despite challenges, despite obstacles. And sometimes I've learned lessons from those who are younger than me, and they see everything with a fresher perspective. So for me, one thing that has been very important is to always make sure that I'm not alone in these moments when the work feels overwhelming, to make sure that I'm connected with others. Sila, Aisha, if you want to add anything.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I just want to add one thing to both the questions, because like in the first question, like how Sarah said that like no movement exists without its challenges. And when we talk about working from a feminist perspective, this is something that we also really practice within Baithak, that how can we also reimagine what organizational structures look like? Because even in the civil society, at times, it works on a very um, um, like it works on a similar work model, as the corporate world, that we see other organizations as competitors. We see them as like we compare ourselves to them, and that there are competitors that we must do better than them. They must do better than us because we are fighting for the same resources. We're fighting in the, we're coexisting in the same space, and the resources over there are limited. And that's where, like the feeling of the notion of comparison or competition arises. And that is also something that we very actively challenge with how we work in Baithak, that within the civil society, how can there be how can there be more solidarity? That if someone is doing similar work, instead of looking them as a comparison, how can we collaborate? How can we co-create? Because how we redefine things within our organizations on the feminist values, it's also important to redefine how collaboration or how the wider civil society space or the feminist space looks like. That instead of looking at each other, as competition, how can we look at each other as collaborators, as someone who can work together? Because we really believe that comparison is the killer of joy, and we need there to be joy for there to be hope in the space that we can work together and we can coexist together. And also one thing for the second question, because you also mentioned something that how can movements sustain, how do you pass over the wisdom and the experience to the younger generation, and so that chain does not break. And I think for that, I'm actually going to credit Aisha a lot, because I feel really grateful, to work in a team where even though someone just joins the team, there's always space for you, like your voice is always heard. And I think that in also to practice a leadership style in which you're also building capacity of other team members as well, but also really mindfully. And I think this is something that we've also been trying to incorporate in our organization, that okay, if someone is is joining in the organization, that how can there be coaching or mentorship within the organization, that other people can also take leadership roles? How can power be shared? How can tasks be shared? And how can we work on the capacity building of other individuals within the organization, so that if you take the one visible leader out of the picture, the entire structure does not break. And for that, internal capacity building and power sharing is really, really important. And like to practice this within the organization and also within the wider civil society space is, we believe, is very, very important.
Thank you very much, Bernadette, for your
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
Very much, Sila and Sarah, for your great answers and emphasizing how collaborative approach is important, whether we are talking about the talk between the generation or working with other organization and not consider them as competitors. So we do have Amber Gulam, please, who is raising the hand. Amber, please.
Hi everyone. So my question is actually that what is the appropriate process for obtaining permission from schools to conduct menstrual health awareness sessions for boys as well? Currently, such sessions are typically offered only to girls at young age, which leaves boys without access to accurate information. So, how to create such awareness for boys so it can reduce stigma, promote a healthier and more respectful environment in school as well? How can we work with the schools to ensure that boys are also included in these important conversations?
Okay, who would like to answer the question, please? Aisha?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
by the way, I am from Pakistan, so I would like that if Aisha will answer this question.
hi, Amber. It's lovely to hear from you. Thank you so much for this question. I think this question might not be directly related to well-being and care, but it's related to the work we do at Baithak. So I'll briefly address it, and then, of course, happy to support outside the session. I think something that you said around working. I think your question is around male engagement on menstrual health, right? How we can also
Yeah,
engage. Perfect.
actually, in the schools and colleges, because in Pakistan there is awareness for girls in school and colleges, but not in but they don't allow boys to attend those sessions.
Yeah. Even for young girls, menstrual health education is not something that's practiced very um, like there's still a lot of challenges with young girls' access to menstrual health education in schools. So yes, there's a lot of taboo and stigma when it comes to reproductive health or menstrual health in Pakistan. In terms of engaging boys and men, so we like at Baithak we have an initiative called M4M, which is meant for menstruation, and that is aimed at engaging young boys and men on conversations around puberty and around menstrual health. It engages them in conversations on how they can also become allies for safer and dignified menstruation for women around them. One way is definitely, I think, what has worked for us is finding allies in the system. Any work we do in activism, even if it's menstrual health education, something that has really worked for us is identifying allies in the institutions, in the systems. So what we do is we identify, let's say, men in the community who are allies, some teachers in the education system who are allies, some community workers who are allies. That has helped us in integrating or in introducing even topics like menstruation that are stigmatized for both girls and boys. So, yeah, something that I think can help if you want to work for for menstrual health education for young boys in schools in Pakistan, but also happy to continue this conversation after this session as well.
Thank you very much, Aisha. This is really important that you emphasize the role of men in the work that you are doing in the communities. And thank you very much, Amber, for the questions. So I have also the question for you, like since you shared the practice, what advice would you give to young female leaders from the CAREC region who maybe feel burnout or feel pressured or like not sure that the work they're doing is like really giving some results? And we don't have much time before our session ends. So maybe on this positive note, we can conclude the session for today. Please, Aisha, Sarah, Sila.
Sila, do you want to go first?
I actually, can you repeat the question? I'm just trying to, yeah.
Yes, what advice would you give to young feminist leaders in the CAREC region who may feel burnout or feel like there is no reward for the work they're doing based on their vast experience that you just recently shared?
So a quick advice I would give is how Aisha said that the system demands our exhaustion. So one advice is to keep resting and keep resisting and to keep prioritizing your well-being.
I can go next. I'll also tie in this response from Svetlana in chat, where she talks about how it's difficult for women to take care of themselves. And often it is women who are in the caregiving roles. So I think it's very important to understand and acknowledge that if we don't take care of ourselves, we will not be able to take care of others. So oftentimes our response or our thought only stops at that we have to be the ones to care for others. But I think over time, it is what we're also seeing is that women burn out faster because of that. So in it, I would say two things. One, acknowledging that if you don't fill your own cup, if you don't rest and take care of yourself, it would be very difficult to then become a caregiver and to take care of others. And the second, knowing that it is very, very difficult to do it in isolation, like it is very hard for us to focus on ourselves, making sure that we have a community around us. So even when it is difficult to take care of ourselves, making sure that there are people around you, maybe your sisters, maybe your friends, other community members who can show up for you. So just ensuring that you've surrounded yourselves with people, with community who are there to take care of you, even as you take care of them.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I just
Yes.
want to quickly add to what Sarah said and also like sort of close it. Is that Sarah talked about community. I think I have found great power, great healing, and great support in sisterhood, power of sisterhood, of how women show up for each other, how feminist activists show up for each other. Growing up, I always heard the narrative that, which is also a patriarchal narrative, which is, like in Pakistan, we were told that a woman is a woman's enemy, something that I grew up hearing. And I absolutely think that it is baseless. It's a
I have one question.
it's patriarchy's way of exhausting us. So my advice to young activists or young women would be to celebrate, to strengthen that sisterhood for collective healing, for support, for solidarity against the patriarchal and oppressive systems.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Thank you very much, Sila, Sarah, our wonderful speakers for today. Thank you very much, dear participant who joined today. Thanks very much for your active participation, the questions. And I would like to say that we will be sharing the recording of today's session on YouTube, and we'll be sending to the WEOP platforms participants. So whenever who wasn't able to join today, you can always access it anytime you have it. Okay, so thank you very much, and I believe on this note we may conclude the session for today. Please stay tuned, follow our Instagram, and keep an eye out for the next session that we will conduct shortly.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
everyone.
I
everyone.
have one
Great
question. I have one question, please.